Hey, good morning. I'm Aaron Nemoitin, and this is Make Games, Drink Coffee, a podcast featuring conversations with game developers about their jobs, their hobbies, and whatever they're passionate about. Today, I'm talking to Jonathan Jennings, a software engineer and game designer who's currently at Owlchemy Labs, working on Dimensional Double Shift, but he's been in the deep end of VR development for a whole decade. I met Jonathan through the games industry gathering, and he is one of the most positive, enthusiastic game developers I know. We had a wide-ranging discussion about VR development, its progress over the years, how it's different from non-VR game development, why the strengths of video games don't lie in cinematic experiences, Jonathan's labor of love VR game Galactic Bar Fight, and more. Let's get to it. Make games. Drink coffee.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Jennings. I'm a software engineer and game designer. I've been working on games for the past 14 years. I specialize in VR space, and I just love to create things.
So I was just looking through your LinkedIn to see if I missed anything that would have been good for, interview notes. And I realized how busy you have been. You've been working, you've been freelancing, you've been volunteering, you've been making your own project, Intergalactic Bar Fight. So to me, we've talked before in the games industry gathering meetups, and I've always thought of you as wow, this guy is the most enthusiastic person about VR that I know. Genuinely enthusiastic, not just, oh, this is cool because it's new or because you could make money or whatever. It's you genuinely care about it as a form of games, interactive entertainment, whatever you want to call it. I'm curious, in the time that you've been really, intensely heads down in this area, how do you feel like it's evolved and changed, and how do you feel about where we're at now?
Man, that's a great question. Yeah, I think VR is kind of crazy, and so part of the reason I'm so passionate about it is because it kind of came out of left field in my career. Like, I was working on mobile games, and then at the time around 2015, 2016, VR interest started to increase, and kind of the goal for a lot of the game companies was just to get somebody who could work on games, and we'll teach you the VR stuff later, but if you just work on games, that's enough. And so I kind of just took that opportunity to lean into VR and just fell in love with what it could mean in terms of immersion. And I think there's an intimacy with VR that I really love. You can really feel the sense of scale of something. You can have these really touching moments. And I'm in love with all sorts of extended reality technology. But I think VR is the first one that spoke to me. Really, we have the opportunity to put people in these virtual worlds, and I really value that. And so really seeing how it's evolved has been kind of crazy. I started out with a Google Cardboard and doing a Ghostbusters game. And so it was just a neat little side project to make some money at the time. And then now I work at Owlchemy Labs, which most popularly known for Job Simulator. And it's I think going from Google Cardboard was just basically we're going to stuff your phone into a headset and pretend that's VR, versus at Owlchemy we have a really detailed systems about we're working on a hand trap VR app, and so how does it feel to grab things? How does it feel to poke at something in VR? How we put so much work into how things sound audio wise, and what is a meaningful interaction, right? What is what is a pinch versus a slap versus a poke? It's just so really, I think I enjoy how, again, intimate it is, kind of diving into how people play and interact with our experiences, and the fact that VR has gotten to this point. I remember when I started out, the way to play VR was to have your friend bring his monster PC to wherever you are, and then go through and fiddle with drivers and stuff for the PC for an hour, and then hopefully for 45 minutes everything would remain stable before it'd break, and he'd have to go in and fix everything again. And so now we have the Quest, in standalone headsets. We're starting to get into the augmented reality glasses and stuff, which are starting to that's going to be a new dimension of how to include extended reality tech. And it's crazy to me, like like now starting VR is as simple as pushing a button, putting a headset on, and just diving in. Still a lot of work for some people, but it's such a seamless experience to the VR that industry that I came into. So yeah, it's gotten easier, it's gotten simpler, and I think the experiences have gotten more complex and engaging. And so I think that's the trajectory you hope any kind of tech kind of moves towards.
It's funny to hear that now with the hindsight of, I've always paid attention to the startup space and investing and the buzz, and VR was definitely an area that got overinvested very, very quickly, because I think people either, it was some combination of they didn't understand how big of a leap this was for most
Right.
people to go from no VR to VR, and how jarring it is of an experience, and how far we had to go to create an experience that was more palatable,
Mhm.
and also thinking that the technology would get better and cheaper and faster at a different speed than it actually did, right? Because we're talking now 10 years since you started, and people were investing in VR like it was already here in
Right.
2016 or 2017 or 2018. So it's nice to hear that from your perspective as someone who knows a lot about it, that it's really getting there. But it's funny to me as someone that follows that stuff that, like, okay, it took about 3 or 4 times as long than the money expected. And in the meantime, what happened was a lot of VR studios got formed, a lot of game companies invested in VR, and they sort of just went, okay, we tried it. It didn't make us $1 billion, so we give up and we're
Right.
done for now. And it's really cool that you get to be at Owlchemy Labs, which I think is like probably the biggest, best funded VR studio in the industry. And it's at Google, which doesn't usually support things like that long term. But
Mhm.
I imagine that compared to a lot of other stuff that Google's doing, it's like, it's like nothing for them. So you can kind of like skate by and not get noticed as like wasting anybody's money. How does it feel to be at Owlchemy after spending so much time working in VR? Like, do you feel like you've made it, or is it just like another job? You're just sort of plugging along doing what you've always done?
Yeah, I mean, for me, working at Alchemy is a dream job, right? Like, the Job Simulator was one of the first 3 VR games I ever played, and so like these games that Alchemy makes kind of formulated what I thought VR games could be and like the scope of them. And so to help like work at a company that kind of pushes that vision, and hopefully influences a whole new generation of VR developers is awesome. And Yeah, I think like would I say I made it? Like I think the artist, the creative in me doesn't ever want to like embrace that because like it feels like a too good to be true thing, or like I don't want to feel like, this is going to be the good old days part of my life, or this is my peak, or so to speak. Um, but like I couldn't be more fulfilled or satisfied with like, what I work on every day. And then like it's a huge difference than a lot of the companies I worked at before, where I think the conversations were a lot of times like how do we position this to be profitable and valuable to people? And I think first of all, Alchemy is kind of like the front runner for a lot of VR tech. I think Google kind of relies on us to like be their consultant perspective on how to move things forward in that space. Um, but uh, but yeah, I think it's just it feels really good to be at a company that doesn't necessarily have to worry about proving its value all the time. And it's also the biggest game company I've worked at, and like it's so cool to like work on something where people are like hungry for like the next project that you're working on. I've never worked at a studio where like people were waiting for the games we work on, and so it's awesome to be at a studio where that's the case, where people are like, oh, I want more Alchemy games. um it's so awesome to hear from like the really passionate, excited VR fans.
That's really cool. I think one of the things I want to get to, in your notes that you sent to me. So like, for people listening to the podcast, like I have a document that I send anyone that's going to come on the podcast that's like, what are the things you're interested in talking about? And one of the things you mentioned is that you're concerned that games are often too much striving for cinematic experiences, and that sort of leaves behind the thing that makes games and makes them great. And I agree about this, which is the interactivity. I think it's cool that you're a part of Owlchemy Labs and the other things that you've done that are on the VR side of trying to do what VR does best instead of trying to make VR do what other stuff does best. And it's really funny that you're saying that Owlchemy Labs is at the forefront of innovation here from the perspective of like, if I was a game industry person 10 years ago and I was looking at these games that are bright and colorful and goofy and like blocky, and I would think like, what are you talking about? How is this at the forefront of anything? But you've had this game that you worked on for a long time called Galactic Bar Fight that is that kind of thing. So I feel like you must have known the entire time that what makes VR great isn't necessarily looking realistic, and what makes it immersive isn't necessarily about looking realistic. It's just about making it like feel good. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so like I'm a 90s baby. I gotta put that out there. And so like the games I really love and the games I really like to make are really fast paced, actiony, big sound effects, explosions, uh poor 16-bit particles all over the place style games. And so one of the games that really inspired me for Galactic Bar Fight was Smash TV,
Oh,
one of
wow.
my all-time favorite games. I just love the pacing of it. And I think the purpose of that was almost in a way to kind of translate that fast-paced, action-packed, grab the nearest thing you can and like shoot whatever you see in front of you type gameplay, was like taking that kind of concept from old arcade games. And I think that's like, I think when you talk about peak games that do interactivity really well, I think you can't really beat arcade games. Arcade games and fighting games, I would say, are like, the story is you as the player. Like that is the experience. I got accepted into the Oculus Launchpad program, which is kind of like an incubator to allow people to work on their projects. I ended up working on 2 projects because I'm overly ambitious and I have a problem with doing too many things at once. And so I worked on both a hip hop VR rhythm game called Supersonic Rhyme Chamber, which was cool and it won a grant. But Galactic Bar Fight was also like my baby. I kind of went into it expecting to work on, but getting a chance to work with awesome people on a cool project, like I couldn't really say no to that either. And so I just kind of worked on a prototype for it for I think about 9 months. I used as many like store assets as I could. I wrote all the systems. So it was really just a labor of love. And then 9 months later, I think Oculus was for the first time allowing, I think they had a program called the App Lab. So you could just like upload your game to the App Lab and kind of see things. It was kind of like an early green light. So just a way to kind of share a game and just see if there's even any interest. And like I would have been happy if 50 people would have downloaded it. I would have been like ecstatic. Like just the fact that anybody in the world, I made this little thing all by myself and people even cared. That would have been amazing. But within the first week, I had over 300 downloads. And I think I don't even remember. I think after the first 3 months, like it was, I think we were at 3,000. And so it was just awesome to like work on this thing and have people like checking it out and like people doing YouTube videos, which like that was terrifying because it's like, oh, well, people are actually sharing their opinion about this thing I made. And so I had to learn how to take criticism, which like that's something I'm better at now. But at the time that was new for me. Yeah. And so it was just really awesome to make this thing that people could play with. And I think the whole purpose of Galactic Bar Fight, I just wanted people to be able to like be an action hero, like in an old 80s movie. And just, like in my pitch, I wrote, I like people would be able to flip over tables and like duck behind cover. And like the whole point was like just to give people this kind of environment where they could just play as an action hero and just kind of go crazy, saving the world and really just explore this canvas of being a hero that was kind of unrestricted, and the goal is just to like shoot until you can't shoot anymore and the timer runs out.
That sounds awesome. So you've got a bunch of experience in volunteering and in education. You've been at Black and Gaming for nearly 5 years, currently the director of education. I'm curious, what have you learned about what works as advice, or like what are the things that are helpful for younger people that are trying to get into games?
When it comes to change, I think I've really learned the best way to kind of approach them is like, I think I try to lean on like the value of their imaginations. Like I'm a big believer, like to me, the best game design tool is like a pen and paper, like or a pencil and paper. If you can draw an idea or write ideas down, like I love seeing people's notebooks filled to the brim with all sorts of crazy ideas. Even if those don't get out, like it's just like the thought and brainstorming exercise is really important. And so I definitely try to encourage any kid or a teenager that's like interested in game development to like just like lean into your imagination.
Make Games, Drink Coffee is brought to you by me, Aaron Nemoitin. This week, I'm finally going to do the thing where I ask you, the listeners, to do stuff. I know, 10 episodes in and I only just remember to do this. I am so good at podcasting. Anyway, if you've been enjoying these interviews, please subscribe. Leave a review if you can. If you're on YouTube, you can like, subscribe, ring the bell. No, that's a gong. Ring the bell. Okay, anyway, leave a comment. Tell the algorithms that this is worth surfacing to people. I would really appreciate it if you did, especially considering I'm doing this for free. Yeah, there's the guilt trip. It's free. Feel bad for me or something. I don't know. If you have any questions, feedback, or want to be on the show, you can email makegamesdrinkcoffee@gmail.com. Let's get back to the interview.
Okay, this is a bit of a swerve back into the technical territory, but you've been working on VR specifically in Unity for the whole time that you've been working on VR. And so I'm sort of wondering, how has that experience changed over time from it being this like frontier brand new thing that was probably pretty hacked into Unity to now being, something that's more well established, and especially now that Unity has gone through a bunch of like management upheaval and changes. What's the experience of actually developing in VR like now compared to how it started?
Yeah, it's a different world. Like I used to like be on the Unity forums often, especially like when I had like my first major VR gig. Um and like and sometimes it's funny, there were times I was talking to future coworkers and had no clue, but we all had like questions
That's
about like
awesome.
yeah, but like like maybe a SDK isn't doing something that's supposed to do. So I guess starting out in VR, like right at first it's like, oh, Unity can do VR stuff, but you have to use an external package. And then there's like all the back and forth of like making sure it actually worked. Then doing test builds, which like that was nightmarish. To like make sure that like it actually shows up the way it's supposed to in VR. It's like making sure that it's like tracking your head and then tracking the controllers. Just it was pretty painful. And like no matter what the device was, I think the easiest ones were like the Google Cardboards, because like again, it's a phone stuffed into a headset. It's like basically just a glorified mobile game that has some basic gyro tracking to like follow your head or hands or whatever. And so that was tough, but I think over time, like seeing like Unity increase like Unity support, like Unity's internal integrations, there just happened to be like actual regular updates for like platforms and stuff over time. Um, like it was kind of like you just took whatever VR solution you had at the time, and that's what you had to work with. And so like there's a lot more variety. The tools are a lot more stable. Yeah, it's nice to like not have to fight my machines as often. Game development, we all have to fight our computers at some point. Like it's just a part of living. But that happens a lot less now than it did in the beginning, where sometimes I'd spend 3 days just trying to get like our app to like our builds to work correctly. Yeah.
So you mentioned that the game that inspired you to love games was Super Mario 3.
Mhm.
And I imagine you're probably not the only one. That game is just such an astounding leap forward in game design. I think that is very much that very much matches with your mention elsewhere that you prefer sort of interactivity to cinematics. Do you feel like that level of kind of design elegance has been achieved in any VR game? Because I'll say I'm not super familiar with VR. I've heard of the outlier hits. I know about Beat Saber, right? But I don't have a VR headset, and it's a pretty big investment in terms of like getting it set up and deciding you're going to do it. So yeah, do you feel like we've figured that sort of elegance and design stuff out in VR, or do you feel like it's still the frontier and we're still finding it?
I think we're still finding it. So I've been in VR 10 years, and so like almost since the beginning, and I think back to like where just like the knowledge that like, oh, you shouldn't move the head, like you shouldn't move the camera when somebody has the headset on because it makes them nauseous. Like
Yeah.
that kind of like really basic knowledge. Like there's like an epiphany where everybody's like, oh, don't shift the camera around. That feels unnatural. It's like turbulence in a plane type thing, right? Um,
Yeah.
and uh, and so you know, considering like I think VR has come so much further. Like I, you know, the Vader Immortals, the Beat Sabers, the you know, we're working on dimensional double shift at Alchemy Labs, and so even our hand tracking VR, like that was even going controllerless in VR, like that's a pretty that was not a popular decision. And but we wanted to push hand tracking for VR, and like people have really gravitated towards it. And so like I think VR is still very much in the early phase of we're figuring out what it feels good to use in VR, what are good interactions and good and satisfying interactions in VR. I look forward to our Mario World moment, like our Super Mario Brothers 3 moment. I think that'd be awesome. Um, I think uh, I think it requires just a bigger understanding of like, you know, the full scope of VR. And I haven't played it yet, but I've seen so many people have videos about Half-Life Alex, and it sounds like that might be as close as we've gotten to the equivalent of a Super Mario Bros. 3 moment. I know people like talk about the graphics and physics of that game. I've seen people do full physics lectures in Half-Life Alex, which is just crazy that you could do that kind of stuff. Um, and so, no, we haven't gotten there. I'm super optimistic. I've heard people, lots of people say that we're still very much in the Atari era of VR games, and I think I'd agree. Um, I'm super curious about like what our like Nintendo Revolution, like what's the must-have Super Mario game of VR. I think you could argue Beat Saber had like a whole moment, like it was really popular in the pop culture. But again, I think if we're in the Atari era, that's almost our Pac-Man. I think that Beat Saber is probably more equivalent to Pac-Man than Mario, right? And so, super excited to kind of see what the future is and what that game that really melds all those systems is for sure.
I think it's really funny to think that the penalty for doing something wrong in VR is so much bigger than the penalty for doing something wrong in any other game, right? If I'm sitting in front of my computer and I'm playing a game and something weird happens, I'm like, ah, that was weird. If
Hmm.
I'm in VR, I could fall over, I could
Yeah.
run into a wall, I
Hmm.
could puke.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
the penalty is very high for doing
Very much
something
so.
wrong.
Yeah, I was testing melee weapons in Galactic Bar Fight, and I was trying to like figure out the right, like what's the right force to like swing your arm to swing the sword and have like a satisfying like slice interaction. Managed to cut myself because I ran my hand against like a plastic Tupperware bin a little too hard, and so managed to give myself a nice little cut. And so yeah, I think definitely like again it kind of goes back to like I actually really enjoy that intimacy. Like I think in Galactic Bar Fight I eventually got to that point where I was like, so if my grandma, who at the time like she was like 75 years old, I was like, if she played this, how hard would I want her to realistically swing her arm in order to have a satisfying sword swing interaction? And I think using that kind of like baseline helped me figure out what the right amount of force was. But it's like lots of considerations like that, and like you said, like you can make people sick in VR, and that's like a lot of people, and that can be the kind of thing that like turns somebody off VR for like the next 5 years if they are sick. So yeah, it can be a lot of pressure and a big challenge to understand like the full implications of um you know how you can affect people in VR.
So you wrote that you love to write documentation, poems, cheesy VO lines, ads, flyers. You mentioned writing your brother's best man speech for his wedding.
Mhm.
Um, So this is sort of a fun thing to be into. So can you tell me about that? And I will say, I know for a fact that you are a big fan of dumb jokes, and I appreciate that. So what is it there? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I think I've always been kind of fascinated about the power of words, right? I think growing up I was a big like Shel Silverstein and Dr. Seuss fan, right? Like so growing up I'd read those books over and over, and even like the worlds that like and that Shel Silverstein and Dr. Seuss painted with their words, even with like just a few sentences always kind of captured me. And so I kind of fell in love with just the act of like writing and expressing my thoughts really, really young. I remember like I used to love like writing my mom poems on Mother's Day type stuff. I used to like love like making flyers for like my church, like just like advertising, whether it was like, hey, come down to the church, or a food bank's happening, or my grandparents ran a church, so like, oh, they're having an anniversary service, and like making that kind of stuff. um when it comes to documentation, I think I like to pride myself, and it's going to sound like I'm putting myself down. I don't mean it that way. I think I'm the dumbest programmer you'll ever meet, like the dumbest good programmer you'll ever meet. And I like that because like I think I have a way of communicating with people on a level that everybody understands, and I can like drink in really complex things and then simplify the language so that it's attainable and understandable for everybody. And so yeah, I think like words just there's such an incredible impact. Like you can capture people, and you can teach people, and you can inform people, and you can make people laugh. um I just think words are such a beautiful art form. And so yeah, I think like my love of words has just always been like a part of me. And so that's where kind of that love of just expression in general comes from.
I love that. I was always a huge fan of Dr. Seuss growing up, and then I, maybe fortunately or unfortunately, read all of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books in middle
Mhm,
school,
mhm.
and that did possible irreparable harm to my ability to express myself in
Mhm.
small sentences, because those are books full of run-on sentences where the joke is like embedded in the structure of the sentence.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I love that stuff too. I love using language. I think it's interesting the way you talk about sort of digesting and re-explaining programming concepts, because
Mhm,
first of all, I think the idea that you have to be like twice as clever to read code as you do to write it, I
mhm,
think that's absolutely true. And what that means is that you should never write code at your maximum level of cleverness, because when you go back later, it's going to be so much extra effort to figure out what you were doing. And also, I have this theory that if someone cannot explain a concept simply, they probably don't actually understand it.
mhm,
And I think this might be a little soapboxy, but going back a few years when there were a lot of people talking about crypto all the time, there were a lot of people talking about it in a way that made it clear that they did not understand it, but they wanted it to sound like they did. And that is kind of the worst possible place to be in, because you're in that situation where everybody's BSing and nobody wants to call it out. And yeah, I love the idea that like being able to just restate something simply is incredibly useful and important. And if you can't do that, there's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And for what it's worth, I'm in total agreement with you. Like, I think I can tell right away if somebody understands what they're talking about. Because if you can't explain it in simple terms, then like you're probably just regurgitating what you heard. And like, sure, there's like some value in that, I guess, but communication's much more about impact. And I'd prefer to impact somebody with like, simplified words or explanations versus, getting too heady, getting too verbose. Like it's just I think I I hate when people's eyes glaze over when I talk to them. Like, I think that feels like an offense. Like, well, and I don't blame them for it, right? Like, if you're talking about something someone doesn't understand and then like they check out, like that to me as a communicator, that means I failed somewhere. And unfortunately, I know a lot of programmers who are like that. And so I think something I've always really valued was like being able to not fall into that trap, or at least being able to like break it down in such a way that's like, A, B, and C are important. You should concern yourself with D.
Jonathan Jennings, thank you so much for being a guest on Make Games, Drink Coffee. It has been a blast talking to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aaron. I'm happy that I could be here with you.
And that's the show. Thank you for listening to Make Games, Drink Coffee. You can find the show online at makegamesdrinkcoffee.com or email me at makegamesdrinkcoffee@gmail.com. Recording, editing, production, and original music by me, Aaron Nemoitin. Drink up. I'll see you next week.